Tuesday mornings in Cartwell, Pennsylvania rarely began with surprises. Sergeant Merrick Osgathorpe knew that better than anyone. After 23 years walking the same hallways of the same police station, in a town where everyone knew each other's names and where the most urgent calls usually involved a knockdown fence or a dog loose on the main road, Merrick had learned one thing above all else. Predictability was a gift. He was at his desk, a cup of cooling coffee to his right, and a stack of overdue reports to his left, when he heard the front door open. There was nothing extraordinary about that. The door opened dozens of times a day, but there was something in the sound of that particular opening, too slow, too hesitant, that made Merrick look up before he even realized he had. And then he saw them. Two girls. The older one came in first, pushing with both hands. The handlebar of the wheelchair she was bringing through the door. Her arms were too thin for the effort they were making. Her eyes, brown, serious, carrying an expression that didn't belong on a child's face at that age, swept the room with a mixture of relief and fear, as if she had arrived at the right place but still wasn't sure it was safe to say so. In the chair, the smaller girl was leaning slightly forward, her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't crying, she wasn't screaming. She simply existed there, quiet, with the kind of silence that isn't calm, it's exhaustion. Merrick stood, up slowly, no sudden movements, the same way he stood when he found injured animals by the side of the road. "Hello," he said, in the low voice he used when he needed words to arrive gently. "Come on in. Are you both okay?" The older girl stopped in the middle of the room. She looked at him. She looked at her sister. Then she looked back at him. "She needs help," the girl said, with a voice that was far too steady for her size. "My dad didn't give her the medicine in time." Merrick was 57 years old. He was the father of 2 grown children, grandfather of 3, and had spent his entire life dealing with difficult situations involving families in crisis. He had seen poverty. He had seen neglect. He had seen what happens when systems fail and people are left alone with problems too large to carry. But there was something in those words, "My dad didn't give her the medicine in time," that caught somewhere in the middle of his chest like a fishhook. It wasn't what she had said. It was the way she said it. Dry, direct, like someone who had rehearsed the sentence so many times on the way there that she had already stripped it of all emotion, keeping only what was essential. He walked toward the girls and knelt down to meet them at eye level. "What's your name?" he asked the older one. "Calixra," she answered. "And hers?" "Elmira. She's my sister." "How old are you, Calixra?" 8. Merrick looked at Elmira. The girl's abdomen was slightly swollen, visible even, through the loose clothing she was wearing. Her face was pale, with that grayish tone that appears when a body has been fighting something for too long. She looked back at him with eyes that seemed older than they should have been. "Hi, Elmira," Merrick said softly. The girl nodded once, small. "Can you tell me where it hurts?" She pointed to her abdomen without saying a word. Merrick stood up. He turned to his assistant, Sandra Braille, who had already moved closer without being asked. She had learned over the years to read Merrick's shoulders like a map. "Call emergency services," he said quietly, "and get social services on the line. Now." Sandra already had the phone in her hand. While they waited for the ambulance, Merrick pulled a low chair in front of the girls and began the conversation the only way he knew how when dealing with children, slowly, without rushing, without making the important questions seem important. He talked about the coffee, about the weather outside, about whether they'd had breakfast. Calixra said yes, then stopped, then said they'd each had 1 piece of toast. "Just one?" Merrick asked, in the same tone someone might use to comment on the weather. There were only 2. She said it without drama, like someone reporting a fact. Merrick made a mental note, not on paper, in the place where he kept things that didn't have a name yet. "Did you 2 come here alone?" he asked. "Yes. The station is almost 1.5 miles from where you live, isn't it?" Calixra looked at him as if the question were unnecessary. "Yes. I know how to push." Merrick closed his eyes for half a second, opened them again. "Where is your father right now, Calixra?" The girl hesitated for the first time since she'd walked in. It was a small hesitation, almost imperceptible, but Merrick saw it. He had learned to see these things. "Home," she said at last. "Does he know you came here?" Another pause, shorter this time. "No." The ambulance arrived 11 minutes later. The paramedics were efficient, gentle, professional. Elmira didn't resist when they examined her. She let them measure, press lightly, ask questions. She answered in single words or head movements, that economy of energy that appears when the body is too busy with other things to waste motion on words. Merrick stayed beside Calixra while the paramedics worked. The girl didn't take her eyes off her sister for a single moment. "You were very brave to come here," Merrick said. Calixra didn't answer. Not because she was rude, but because she didn't seem like the kind of child who received compliments easily, as if the word brave belonged to a language she was still learning to speak. "Is she going to be okay?" Calixra asked, her eyes still on her sister. "The doctors are going to take care of her," Merrick answered carefully. "But we need you to help us understand what happened. Can you do that?" Calixra finally looked at him. "I can," she said. And there was something in those two words, something in the way she said them, with the gravity of someone who had carried a weight alone for far too long and had finally found someone to share it with, that stayed with Merrick for the rest of that day, and for the days that followed. As Elmira was taken to the hospital, Merrick returned to his desk and opened a new file. The case at that moment seemed straightforward. A child with a medical condition, a father who had failed to properly administer her treatment. It wasn't uncommon, especially in Cartwell, where the nearest pharmacies were a considerable distance away, where many families lived with their budgets stretched to the limit, where family doctors were a luxury many couldn't afford. He typed the name, Elmira Doss Quinley, 6 years old. Then the father's name, Drevin Quill Sarnick. He asked Sandra to pull up medical records, social assistance history, and any previous incidents linked to the address. While he waited, he looked out the window. The street outside was empty, as it always was at that hour of the morning. The sun had come out, but without much conviction, that pale, weakened way the sun shines in late autumn when the light exists, but doesn't warm. Merrick thought about Calixra pushing that wheelchair for almost a mile and a half. He thought about the 2 pieces of toast. He thought about the way the girl had said, "I know how to push," without pride, without complaint, the way someone describes a skill acquired out of necessity. When Sandra came back with the first records, Merrick took them, put on the reading glasses he had sworn to himself he wouldn't need after 50, and began to read. And it was in that moment, in those first pages, that something began to shift inside him. Because what was written there wasn't the story of a careless father. It was the story of something far more complicated, and far sadder. Elmira Doss Quinley, medical history. Hormonal condition diagnosed at age 3. Continuous medication required. Last recorded appointment, 17 weeks ago. Last. Prescription pickup, 11 weeks ago. Merrick read the last line again. 11 weeks. He took off his glasses. He stared at the wall for a moment. Outside, a dry leaf struck the window pane, carried by the wind, and slid down until it disappeared. Merrick picked up his notepad, wrote 3 words at the top of the blank page, and underlined each of them twice. What really happened? Because Merrick Osgathorpe had learned in 23 years that the stories that seemed simple at the beginning were always, the ones with the most layers. And this one, he could already feel, had many. The drive to the Sarnick residence took Merrick 8 minutes. He knew the area. Everyone in Cartwell knew the area. Not because it was remarkable in any way, but because places like it have a particular kind of presence in small towns. A presence that isn't loud, that doesn't announce itself. It simply sits there, at the edges of everything, quiet and persistent, like a bruise that never quite heals. The neighborhood, if it could still be called that, was a stretch of older homes on the western side of town, where the roads hadn't been properly repaved since the late 90s and where the houses seemed to lean into each other slightly, as if bracing against something only they could feel. Some yards were tended, most weren't. A few had plastic chairs on the porch, the kind that go brittle in the cold and crack without warning. A dog barked somewhere behind a wooden fence as Merrick pulled his vehicle to a stop. He sat in the car for a moment before getting out. It was something he always did. Not out of hesitation, Merrick Osgathorpe was not a man who hesitated, but out of habit. A few seconds of stillness before entering someone else's story. A small act of preparation that he had never been able to fully explain, even to himself. He looked at the house. Number 42. A single-story structure with pale yellow siding that had once been white. 2 windows facing the street, both with the blinds drawn. A porch with 3 steps, the middle one visibly warped. A mailbox. Leaning at a slight angle, stuffed with envelopes that hadn't been collected in what looked like several days. Merrick got out of the car. He knocked twice. Nothing. He knocked again. 3 times. A little firmer. A long silence followed. The kind of silence that isn't empty. It's full of someone. Deciding something on the other side. Then, finally, the sound of footsteps. Slow. Heavy. The footsteps of someone who wasn't expecting company and wasn't particularly glad it had arrived. The door opened. The man who appeared in the doorway was not what Merrick had been expecting, though he couldn't have said precisely what he had been expecting. Drevin Quill Sarnik was somewhere in his mid-30s, though he looked older, not in the way that some people age gracefully, accumulating character and quiet dignity, but in the way that exhaustion ages a person from the inside out, hollowing things, leaving behind only the outline of what was once there. He was tall, with broad shoulders that curved slightly inward, as if the width of them had become a burden somewhere along the way. His hair was unwashed, pushed back roughly from his forehead. His eyes, dark, deeply set, moved from Merrick's face to the badge on his jacket and back again, with the particular stillness of someone who has been dreading this exact moment, and is now, almost with a kind of terrible relief, watching it arrive. He didn't say anything. Merrick spoke first. "Mr. Sarnik, I'm Sergeant Osgathorpe. May I come in?" A pause. "Is it about the girls?" Drevin asked. His voice was low, rough at the edges, like something that hadn't been used enough recently. "Yes," Merrick said simply. Drevin stepped back from the door without another word. The inside of the house told its own story, the way interiors always do. It was clean in the places that mattered. The floor was swept, the dishes in the drying rack were stacked with a kind of deliberate care. But there was a thinness to everything, a sparseness that went beyond simple minimalism. The furniture was old but not uncared for. A couch with a blanket folded over the arm, a small television on a wooden stand, a dining table with 4 chairs, though one of them had been pushed against the wall and turned slightly away from the others, as if it had been excluded from something. On the kitchen counter, Merrick noticed a half-empty box of crackers, a jar of peanut butter, nearly finished, 2 cups turned upside down beside the sink, no groceries visible, no fruit bowl, no sign of a recent meal beyond those small, careful remnants. Drevin stood near the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed over his chest, not aggressively, but protectively, in the way people hold themselves when they are bracing for something painful. "Where are they?" he asked. "Elmira is at the hospital," Merrick said. "She's being evaluated. Calixra is with our social services coordinator." Something moved across Dreven's face. It was fast, and it was complicated. Relief and dread occupying the same expression at the same time, which is one of the stranger things a human face can do. "She walked there herself, didn't she?" he said. It wasn't a question. "She pushed her sister there," Merrick said. "Almost a mile and a half." Drevin uncrossed his arms. He put one hand on the doorframe beside him and looked at the floor. "I know," he said quietly. Merrick watched him. "Mr. Sarnik, I need to ask you some questions. You're not under arrest. You're not obligated to answer without a lawyer present. But I want to understand what happened, and I think you want me to understand it too." Drevin looked up. "Sit down," he said after a moment. "Please." They sat across from each other at the dining table. Merrick placed his notepad on the table but didn't open it yet. He had learned over the years that the notepad changed things. The moment the pen came out, People started choosing their words differently, started performing their honesty rather than offering it. So he left it closed for now and just looked at the man across from him. Drevin Sarnik looked back. He had the expression of someone who had been rehearsing a conversation in his head for a long time and was now realizing that the rehearsal had not been sufficient. "When did Elmira last take her medication?" Merrick asked. Drevin's jaw tightened slightly. 4 days ago, he said. "And before that?" "She was taking it. Not every day like she's supposed to. But," he stopped. Started again. "I was stretching it. Half dose every other day, trying to make it last." "How long had you been doing that?" A long pause. "About 6 weeks." Merrick absorbed that quietly. He didn't react. He had learned that reacting, even slightly, even with something as small as a shift in posture, closed doors, and he needed this particular door to stay open. "Tell me about the prescription," he said. Drevin rubbed the back of his neck. "The prescription runs out every 30 days. The refill costs $62 if you have the insurance copay. We lost the insurance in March when the plant closed. After that, it's full price, $148 a bottle. And you couldn't cover that." It wasn't a question either, but Drevin answered it like one. "I was covering it. For a while. I sold things. The TV in. The bedroom. Some tools. I had some savings. Not much, but something. Then the car needed a repair or it wouldn't pass inspection, and I needed the car to get to interviews, and the interviews never turned into anything, and—" He stopped. The sentence had too many ands in it. That was the thing. About lives unraveling. The conjunctions multiplied. Every end was another link in a chain that had grown too long, too heavy, impossible to lift without putting something else down. "About 6 weeks ago," Drevin continued, his voice lower now. "I ran the math. I had $80 left after the electric bill. The prescription was $148. I bought groceries with $60 and put $20 toward the prescription. So you had $20 toward a $148 prescription." "Yes." "And you decided to ration what was left." "I decided," Drevin said. And the word decided came out like something he'd been turning over in his mouth for weeks, something that had lost its shape from being handled too much. "I thought I could manage it, keep her stable until I figured out the rest. She seemed okay for a while. She complained about her stomach, but I thought—" He stopped again. "You thought it was manageable," Merrick said. "I thought I could fix it," Drevin said. And then, very quietly, "I was wrong." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that forms when something true has been said and both people in the room are giving it the space it deserves. Merrick finally opened his notepad. He wrote the date at the top, the time, the address. Routine things. Things that gave his hands something to do while his mind worked through what he had heard. "Mr. Sarnik," he said without looking up from the notepad, "I need to ask you about something else. About the girl's mother." He heard Drevin shift in his chair. "Isolde," Drevin said. The name came out flat, the way names do when they've been said so many times in the dark that they've worn smooth. "She left 2 years ago?" 2 years and 3 months. "Is there any contact?" "No." "Does she know about Elmira's condition?" "She knew before she left. After, I don't know what she knows. She doesn't call. She doesn't write." He paused. "I stopped expecting her to." Merrick looked up from the notepad. He studied Drevin's face carefully, not with suspicion, exactly, but with the attentiveness of someone trying to read a document written in a language he mostly, but not entirely, understood. What he saw was not the face of a man who was hiding something. It was the face of a man who was exhausted in a very specific way, the kind of exhaustion that comes not from a single catastrophic event, but from an accumulation, weeks and months of small defeats, of problems solved only partially, of gaps in every plan that kept widening no matter how much effort was poured into them. It was, Merrick thought, the exhaustion of someone who had been running toward something for a long time without ever getting closer to it. "When did you realize how serious Elmira's condition had become?" Merrick asked. Drevin folded his hands on the table. 3 days ago, he said. "She stopped eating. She said her stomach hurt all the time, Not just sometimes. She was sleeping more than usual, and when she was awake, he searched for the word, far away. Like she was there, but not really. And you didn't take her to the hospital. I didn't have. He stopped himself, started again. I was going to. Yesterday. I was going to take her. Yesterday. I'd figured out I could borrow the money for the prescription from my neighbor, Joe Pelham. He said he could lend it to me, and I was going to pick it up in the morning and then take her to the clinic, and he opened his hands, looked at them. And then she was gone. Her and Calixera both. I woke up and they were gone. The room was very quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the trees at the edge of the yard, and the pale November light shifted against the closed blinds, thin and uncertain. Mr. Sarnik, Merrick said, and his voice was measured, careful, the voice he used when he needed someone to hear not just the words but the weight behind them. Your daughter is at the hospital right now. The doctors are going to do everything they can for her. But I need you to understand that this is serious. And I need you to be honest with me about everything. Not some of it. Everything. So that I can help as much as I'm able to. Drevin looked at him. His eyes, in that moment, were not the eyes of someone calculating. They were not the eyes of someone performing remorse for an audience. They were simply... And this was the thing that Merrick would remember most about. That morning, the thing that would come back to him later, in the quieter moments, they were the eyes of someone who already knew he had failed, had known it for weeks, and had been carrying that knowledge alone in a house with thin walls and an empty refrigerator and two small girls who were counting on him. I'll tell you everything, Drevin said. And he did. Merrick left the house 40 minutes later. He sat in his car again, as he always did. That small pause before re-entering the world. But this time it lasted longer than usual. He looked at his notepad. The pages were full now, covered in his careful, unhurried handwriting. Facts, dates, amounts, sequences of events. But what couldn't be written in the notepad, what resisted the clean lines of official documentation, was the feeling that had settled over him during those 40 minutes across the table from Drevin Sarnik. The feeling of sitting inside a situation that had no villain, that had only circumstances, and decisions made inside those circumstances, and consequences that no one had chosen but everyone was now living with. He thought about Calixera again. 8 years old, pushing that chair for a mile, and as she, half through the cold, because she had decided, in whatever quiet, serious way that child decided things, that she was going to get help for her sister even if no one else did. He thought about what that meant, what it took, what it cost. He started the car. There were more questions ahead. More. Records to pull, more people to speak with, more layers to uncover. The case was not resolved. It was barely, in fact, begun. But Merrick Osgathorpe drove back toward the station with the particular focus of a man who has looked at something complicated and decided, without drama and without hesitation, that he is going to understand it completely, even if understanding it completely turned out to be the hardest part of all. The Cartwell Regional Medical Center was not a large hospital. It had 2 floors, 41 beds, a small emergency wing that doubled as the primary care intake on weekday mornings, and a staff that knew each other well enough to share coffee without asking and argue about the thermostat without resentment. It was the kind of hospital that existed in the spaces between larger cities, not equipped for everything, but equipped enough, and staffed by people who had chosen to be there specifically because there was a place that needed them. Merrick had been to the hospital more times than he could count. He knew which elevator was slower. He knew that the vending machine on the 2nd floor always jammed on the second selection from the left. He knew Dr. Priscilla Farron, the attending physician on duty that morning, well enough to skip the formalities when he found her in the hallway, outside the children's assessment room. She was holding a tablet, reading something with the focused expression of a person who is absorbing information and simultaneously deciding what to do with it. She looked up when she heard his footsteps. "Merrick," she said. Not a greeting, exactly. More like an acknowledgement. The way people say names when they're already thinking 3 steps ahead. "How is she?" he asked. Dr. Farron glanced back at the closed door of the room, then at him. "Stable," she said. "For now. But I want to talk to you about what we're seeing. Come with me." They sat in a small consultation room at the end of the hallway. 2 chairs, a table, a whiteboard with something half erased on it from a previous conversation. The kind of room that held difficult discussions. The walls had absorbed enough of them that the air inside felt slightly heavier than everywhere else. Dr. Farron set her tablet on the table and folded her hands. Elmira has a condition called congenital adrenal hyperplasia, she said. It's a hormonal disorder. The body doesn't produce enough of certain hormones on its own, which means it depends entirely on medication to regulate basic physiological functions. Without the medication, the body goes into what's called an adrenal crisis. Slowly, then all at once. What does that mean, practically? Merrick asked. It means that for a while the body compensates. It finds workarounds. The child might seem tired, a little off, but still functioning. Then the compensation fails and things deteriorate quickly. She paused. The half-dosing didn't help. In some ways, it may have extended the window, kept her from crashing sooner. But it also meant her system was never fully supported, which created a kind of slow erosion over weeks. Merrick thought about Dreven's words at the kitchen table. She seemed okay for a while. How long has this been building? He asked. Based on her blood work and current state, at least 6 weeks of significant undermedication, possibly longer of inconsistent dosing before that. 6 weeks. The same number Dreven had given him. Will there be permanent effects? Merrick asked. Dr. Farron was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that prepares a person for something they don't particularly want to hear. It's too early to say with certainty, she said carefully. We're going to know more in the next 48 hours. What I can tell you is that children are resilient, and we caught this before the worst-case scenario. But there may be some impacts on her development, her growth, possibly her adrenal function long-term, depending on how the recovery goes. Merrick absorbed this. He kept his expression steady, the way he had trained himself to over decades, not because he didn't feel things, but because the moment he felt them visibly, the room stopped being a place of information and became a place of emotion. And he needed it to be both, in the right order. I need her records, he said. Everything you have, and I need to know who else has seen her recently. I pulled them before you arrived, Dr. Farron said. She slid the tablet across the table. I thought you might. Merrick spent the next hour in that consultation room with the door closed. He read slowly. Not because the records were complicated, they weren't in the clinical sense, but because he had learned, over a long career, that official documents tell 2 stories simultaneously. The first is the one written in the document itself: dates, diagnoses, prescriptions, appointments. The second is the story written in the gaps: the missed appointments, the lapses between visits, the prescriptions filled weeks late or not at all. The negative space, the shape of what wasn't done. The records for Elmira Doss Quinley were a study in that second kind of story. She had been diagnosed at 3 years old by a pediatric endocrinologist at a larger hospital in the city, 40 miles from Cartwell. At the time of diagnosis, the family had insurance through the employer of her mother, Isolde Karen Velth. The treatment plan was clear, consistent, well documented. Monthly follow-ups. Regular prescription refills. Growth monitoring every 6 months. Then, 2 years ago, the appointments had become irregular. The gaps between prescription pickups began to stretch. 30 days becoming 45, 45 becoming 60. The pediatric specialist notes indicated 2 missed appointments in the space of 4 months, followed by a gap with no contact at all. When Elmira finally appeared at the clinic again, she was accompanied not by her mother, but by her father, and the insurance information on file had changed. A handwritten note in the margin of 1 page. The, kind that clinicians sometimes add informally, outside the official record. Read, father present. Mother not available per father's account. Father appears attentive but uncertain medication protocol. Reviewed instructions verbally. Recommend follow-up in 3 weeks. There was no record of that. Follow-up taking place. Merrick turned the page. The prescription history was its own document. Elmira's medication was listed as a controlled pharmaceutical requiring monthly renewal. In the first year of treatment, pickups had been regular, within a day or two of expiration each time, like clockwork. Then the pattern had fragmented. A pickup 6 days late, then 12 days late. Then a gap of 23 days where no pickup was recorded at all, followed by a pickup of a partial prescription, 30 days worth instead of the standard 60, at a pharmacy that was not the family's usual one. Merrick looked at that entry for a long time. A different pharmacy. A partial prescription. No explanation in the record. He wrote it down. Sandra had sent 3 messages to his phone while he was reading. He read them now. Driven Sarnik. Employment. Hartwell Components. Plant. Laid off. March 14th. Severance. 6 weeks. Unemployment benefits applied for, approved at reduced rate due to administrative dispute. Current status, receiving partial benefits. Previous address, 14 Culverton Road. Moved to current address 8 months ago. Previous landlord reports unpaid rent. 3 months. Outstanding at time of departure. No prior criminal record. No prior domestic incident reports at current address. 1 wellness check requested by a neighbor, Dorothy Almende, approximately 4 months ago. Responding officer noted no immediate concerns. Merrick read the 3rd message twice. A wellness check. 4 months ago, neighbor named Dorothy Almende. He typed back, "Get me her contact information." He found Calixra in a small room near the social services office on the ground floor. She was sitting in a chair that was slightly too large for her, with a cup of juice on the table beside her, that she hadn't touched. Across from her sat Paula Renner, the social services coordinator, a woman in her 50s with the particular quality of stillness that comes from years of sitting with children in difficult situations without making anything worse. Paula caught Merrick's eye through the window and gave a small nod. He entered quietly. Calixra looked up when he came in. She tracked him with those serious brown eyes, the same way she had when she'd first walked into the station that morning, measuring, assessing, filing away the information she gathered. "Hi, Calixra," Merrick said, sitting down. "How are you doing?" "Okay," she said. The word was automatic, reflexive, the way children say, "okay," when they have learned that saying the true answer takes longer and costs more. "Have you heard anything about your sister?" she asked. "She's being taken care of," Merrick said. "The doctors are with her. She's in good hands." Calixra nodded. She picked up the juice cup, looked at it, set it down again without drinking. "Can I ask you a few questions?" Merrick said. "You don't have to answer anything you don't want to." "I know," she said. He almost smiled. There was something about the way she said "I know," complete, final, like someone closing a door gently but firmly, that reminded him of people twice her age. People who had learned early that they were the ones who had to keep track of things. "How long has Elmira been feeling sick this time?" asked. Calixra thought about it with genuine concentration, the way children do when they take questions seriously. "A long time," she said. "But really bad since last week. Did you tell your dad how bad it was?" "Yes." "What did he say?" A pause. "He said he was going to fix it. He said he was working on it." She looked at the table. "He always says that." There was no bitterness in her voice when she said it. No accusation. Just the simple, slightly tired register of someone reporting a pattern they have observed many times. "He always says that." "Calixra," Merrick said gently. "Why did you decide to come to the station today? Why not wait for your dad to take her?" The girl was quiet for a moment. When she answered, her voice was still steady, still even, still carrying that quality of someone much older than 8 years old. "Because she was getting worse," she said. "And I didn't want to wait and find out I should have gone sooner." The room was very still. Paula Renner across the table looked down at her notepad. She didn't write anything. She just looked at it. Merrick looked at Calixra. 8 years old, pushing a wheelchair for a mile and a half in the cold, making the decision that an adult in her life had not made. Not out of defiance, not even out of fear exactly, out of love and clarity and the kind of quiet, devastating competence that should never have to exist in a child. "You did the right thing," Merrick said. Calixra looked at him. "No," she said again. Dorothy Almond answered her phone on the second ring. She was 71, a retired schoolteacher, and had lived on the same street as the Sarnik family for 11 years. She spoke carefully, the way people do when they suspect their words might become official, but she spoke honestly. "I called because I was worried," she said. "This was back in July, I think. Maybe early August. I'd seen the girls outside a few times, and the little one looked thin, too thin. And once I knocked on the door to bring over some bread I'd made, and the older girl answered. Not the father, the girl. And she said her father was asleep, and she was watching Elmira." "What time was this?" Merrick asked. "Around noon, on a Tuesday." "Did you speak with the father afterward?" "I saw him a few days later. He was very polite. He thanked me for the bread. He looked—" Dorothy paused. "He looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in a long time. I asked how they were managing, and he said fine. I didn't push." Another pause. "I think about that now. Whether I should have pushed." Merrick thanked her. He wrote her name in his notes and underlined it. After he hung up, he sat. For a moment in the consultation room, alone. He spread the records out across the table. The medical history, the prescription log, the employment file, Sandra's messages, his own notes from the conversation with Dreven. Separately, each piece was incomplete, a fragment, a suggestion. Together, they were beginning to form something. Not a picture of neglect in the way the word is usually meant, calculated, cold, indifferent, but something more complicated. A picture of a family standing at the intersection of poverty and illness and isolation, where every road out required resources that weren't there, and every decision made without those resources left something essential undone. A medication rationed, an appointment missed, a neighbor who knocked once and didn't push. Small things, ordinary things, the kind of things that happen in thousands of households, in thousands of towns, and never become anyone's case file. Until the morning, two girls walk into a police station alone, and a sergeant looks up from his desk, and the door opens too slowly, and something about the sound of it tells him, before he can say why, that this one is different. Merrick gathered the papers. He stacked them carefully, the way he always did, and slid them into the folder. Outside the consultation room window, the November sky had turned the color of old pewter. The day was running on. There were more people to speak with, more gaps to fill. He stood up, picked up the folder, and walked back. Out into the hallway. The case, he now understood, was not about one decision, or one man, or one missed prescription. It was about everything that had made those things possible. And that, he knew from long experience, was always the hardest thing to write in a report, because it never fit neatly into a box. The pharmacy was called Delman's. It had been on the corner of Birch and Calder Street for 34 years, which in Cartwell meant it was practically an institution. The kind of place where the pharmacist knew your name and your prescription history, and sometimes, if you'd been coming long enough, asked about your kids without needing to be reminded how many you had. The pharmacist on duty that afternoon was a man named Gerald Foss. He was 63, wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck, and had the unhurried manner of someone who had learned long ago that rushing in his profession cost more than it saved. He recognized Elmira's name before Merrick finished saying it. "The Sarnik girl," Gerald said quietly. He set down the bottle he'd been labeling and gave Merrick his full attention in the way that people do when they already know the news is not good. "I heard. She was taken to the hospital this morning." "Word travels fast," Merrick said. "It's Cartwell," Gerald replied. Simply, completely. Merrick placed the prescription log on the counter between them. "I want to walk through this with you," he said. "Specifically, the last 4 months." Gerald looked at the log. He didn't need to consult his own records. His expression said he remembered. "He came in every month," Gerald said. "Regular as anything, for a long time. Then things started shifting. He'd come in late, ask about payment plans. Once he asked if we carried a generic version." Gerald shook his head slightly. "There isn't one. Not for that medication. I told him that. I could see it land on him like something heavy." "Did he ever mention what he was doing when he couldn't afford the full prescription?" Gerald was quiet for a moment. Not directly, he said, but about 2, but. Months ago, he came in and bought 2 weeks' worth instead of the full month. Said it was what he could manage right then. I asked if he wanted me to look into any assistance programs. He said he'd already tried. Said the paperwork took weeks, and Elmira didn't have weeks. Merrick wrote that down. He said she didn't have weeks. And yet, weeks had passed. More than 6 of them. Because the crisis hadn't felt like a crisis yet. Because the crisis had arrived quietly, in increments, disguised as something manageable, right until the morning it wasn't. Did you see him after that? Merrick asked. Once, Gerald said. About 3 weeks ago. He came in without the girls, just stood at the counter for a minute looking at the shelf behind me. Then he asked how much it would cost to refill without insurance and with no assistance. I told him. He nodded. He said. Gerald paused, and something in his expression shifted, something that wasn't quite professional distance anymore. He said, I'll figure it out. And then he left. The pharmacy was quiet around them. A refrigerator hummed somewhere in the back. Outside, a car passed slowly on the wet street. He didn't come back after that, Gerald said. No, Merrick confirmed. He didn't. Merrick sat in his car outside Delman's for a long time. The street was beginning to empty as the afternoon wore thin. Shop lights came on one by one, warm rectangles against the gray, and the few people still on the sidewalk moved quickly, heads down against the cold. He thought about what Gerald Foss had said. I'll figure it out. 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of figuring that had not produced a solution. 3 weeks of a child getting incrementally worse while her father stood at the edge of a problem he couldn't cross. He thought about Drevin at the kitchen table. Hands open. I was wrong. He thought about Calixera. I didn't want to wait and find out I should have gone sooner. 3 people in the same house, carrying the same crisis in 3 completely different ways. The father holding on to the belief that he could still fix it. The older daughter watching the evidence that he couldn't. The younger daughter, quiet, exhausted, somewhere in between, simply enduring. Merrick started the car. There was one more stop to make before the day was done. Dr. Farron found him in the hallway outside Elmira's room at 4:15. She's awake, the doctor said, and she's asking about her sister. Merrick exhaled slowly. That's a good sign, he said. It is, Dr. Farron agreed. Then, Merrick, the 48-hour window I mentioned. I've been looking at the latest blood work. She responded well to the initial treatment. Better than I expected, honestly. What does that mean for the long-term concerns you mentioned? It means I'm cautiously optimistic, Dr. Farron said carefully. It doesn't mean we're out of the woods, but it means the woods might be smaller than I feared this morning. Merrick nodded. He stood there for a moment outside the closed door, behind which a 6-year-old girl was awake and asking for her sister, and felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel in the middle of a case. Something that wasn't quite relief, because it was too early for that, but was adjacent to it. The first small loosening of the tightest knot. Then he turned and walked back down the hallway, because there was still work to do, and the day wasn't finished. And Merrick Osgathorpe had never been the kind of man who confused a hopeful sign with a resolution. But he held it, quietly, as he walked. The way you hold small things carefully, when the large things are still uncertain. There is a particular kind of silence that exists in small towns. It is not the silence of indifference exactly. It is something more complicated than that, something closer to the silence of people who saw something, felt something, maybe even said something quietly to a spouse or a neighbor over the kitchen table, but never said it loudly enough for it to matter. Never said it to the person who could have done something with it. Cartwell had that silence. Merrick had grown up inside it. He knew its texture. He knew how it worked, how it wasn't cruelty, wasn't coldness, was mostly just the accumulated weight of people telling themselves that it wasn't their place, that someone else would handle it, that the family seemed to be managing, that things like this had a way of working themselves out. He had spent 23 years watching things not work themselves out. He made 4 calls the following morning. The first was to the elementary school that Calixera attended, Birchwood Primary, a low brick building 6 blocks from the police station. He spoke with the principal, a woman named Helen Vost, who had been at the school for 18 years and knew every child in her building, by name and by circumstance. Calixra Van Holloway, Helen said without needing to look anything up. Quiet, exceptionally bright. One of those children you notice not because they cause problems, but because they never do. Always on time, always prepared. She does the kind of careful, thorough work that makes you wonder what's driving it. Has she ever said anything about her home situation? Merrick asked. Not directly, Helen said. But there were signs. Last winter, she came in 3 days in a row without a proper coat. I gave her one from our donation closet, and she thanked me. Very formally, like a small adult. A pause. I called the house once. The father answered. He was polite, said things were fine, thanked me for looking out for her. I noted it in her file and moved on. I think about that now. There it was again. I think about that now. Merrick had heard that phrase 4 times in 2 days. From Dorothy Almend, from Gerald Foss, from the responding officer who had done the wellness check in July, and now from Helen Vost. 4 people who had seen enough to notice. Not enough. They had each decided to act. He thanked Helen and made the second call. The second call was to the unemployment office that had been handling Draven's case since March. He was transferred 3 times before reaching a caseworker named Terrence Polk, who spoke with the careful neutrality of someone accustomed to being blamed for things that were not entirely within his control. The Sarnik file, Terrence said after a pause during which Merrick heard keyboard clicks. There was a dispute about his eligibility category after the plant closed. The company classified the layoffs as voluntary separations to avoid paying the full severance tier. We flagged it, but the appeal process takes, he paused again. It takes time. How much time? Merrick asked. His appeal has been pending for 4 months. And during that time, he's been receiving partial benefits. Reduced benefits, yes. About 40% of what he would have received if the original classification had been correct. Merrick wrote that down. 40% of an already modest benefit for 4 months, while paying rent, utilities, groceries, and a prescription that cost $148 a month. The math was not complicated. What was complicated was the fact that no single part of it was anyone's explicit fault, and yet all of it together had placed one family in an impossible position and kept them there, month after month, until the position became a crisis. What happens with the appeal now? Merrick asked. Given the circumstances, Terrence said. Carefully, I expect it will be expedited. Now it would be expedited. Merrick kept his voice even. Thank you, he said, and ended the call. The third call was the one he had been putting off. He found the number in the case file, a cell number, disconnected, followed by a new one obtained through a relative's contact. He dialed it and waited. It rang 5 times. Then, hello? The voice was a woman's, cautious, slightly flattened, the way voices get when the person has learned to be careful about unknown numbers. Is this Isolde Karen Velth? Merrick asked. A long pause. Who is this? Is Sergeant Osgathorpe, Cartwell Police Department. I'm calling about your daughters, Ms. Velth, about Elmira. The pause this time was different. Heavier. Is she... The voice stopped. Started again. Is she alive? Yes, Merrick said. She's in the hospital. She's stable. He heard something on the other end of the line that he couldn't quite classify. Not quite a sob, not quite a sigh. Something in between, quickly controlled. What happened? Isolde asked. Merrick told her. Briefly, factually, the way he delivered difficult information. Enough to be understood, not more than was necessary. When he finished, the line was quiet for a long moment. I didn't know, Isolde said finally. About the medication, about how bad things had gotten. I didn't... She stopped. Merrick waited. I left because I had to, she said. Her voice was careful now, deliberate. I know how that sounds. I know what it looks like from the outside, but I want you to understand that I left because staying was... She paused. It was a different kind of harm, and I wasn't strong enough to find another way. I'm not calling to assign blame, Ms. Velth, Merrick said. I'm calling because your daughters need people in their corner right now. Both of them. And I need to know whether you're able to be one of those people. The silence stretched. Then, I want to be, she said quietly. I don't know if I've earned the right to be, but I want to be. That's a start, Merrick said. He meant it. The fourth call was the shortest. He called his own daughter, Brianna, who lived 40 minutes away and had called him twice that week without getting an answer. She picked up on the first ring. Dad. Finally. I know, he said. It's been a week. Are you okay? He looked out the window of his office. The street outside was quiet in the gray afternoon light. Somewhere out there, in a hospital room, a 6-year-old girl was getting better. In a temporary placement home, her 8-year-old sister was waiting. In a house on the western edge of town, a man was sitting with his choices, and in an unemployment office, an appeal was finally being expedited. I'm okay, Merrick said. Just a hard case. Do you want to talk about it? Not yet, he said. Soon. Okay, Dad. Bree, he said before she could hang up. Tell the kids I said hello. Tell them, he paused, tell them their grandfather is thinking about them. A brief silence on the line, then, warmly, I'll tell them. He set the phone down. Outside, the afternoon light shifted, thinned, began its early retreat toward evening. The day was almost done, but the case was not yet.